Good afternoon, Virgo. Something is unraveling, not loudly, not all at once, but in that quiet, persistent way that things unravel when they were never meant to hold in the first place, thread by thread, in the dark, while everyone pretends not to notice. And you've been feeling it, haven't you? That shift in the air, that almost imperceptible change in weight, like a door somewhere closed or opened, and the pressure in the room is different now, and you can't quite explain why to anyone who wasn't already paying attention. But you were paying attention. You always were. That's the thing about you. You notice, even when noticing costs you something. So let's talk about what you noticed. There was always a third presence, not always a person you could see clearly, sometimes just a shadow at the edge of things, a name that appeared once and then was buried too quickly, a silence that lasted a second too long when you asked a certain question, an absence in their eyes at moments when they should have been fully there. You felt it, even before you had a name for it, even before the pieces arranged themselves into something you could look at directly. The body knows before the mind is willing. And your body was already carrying the shape of this, the tension of it, the particular weight of sharing something that should have been only yours is less than #0. 5# is greater than long before you allowed yourself to think it clearly. And you told yourself to stop imagining things. Didn't you? I want to talk about what it does to a person carrying that kind of knowing without permission to name it. Because there is a very specific kind of loneliness that lives inside a connection that should have been whole but wasn't, where you were present fully, vulnerably with everything you had, and something in the other person was always slightly elsewhere, divided, held by something you couldn't touch, couldn't compete with, couldn't even clearly identify because it was never brought into the light. You weren't crazy. Let me say that again because I think you need to hear it more than once. You were not crazy. The gap you felt was real. The distance that appeared without explanation, real. The moments where you reached and something was missing, real. You were reading the room accurately. The room was just not telling you the full truth. The third party. I want to talk about who they are, not as a villain, not as a rival, but as an archetype. Because in almost every triangle, there is the one in the middle, the one held between two forces, and there are the two on either side who have far more in common than either of them would ever want to admit. Both waiting, both partially seen, both carrying something they were never directly asked to carry, both in their own way pouring into something that wasn't giving back in equal measure. The other person in this, the third presence, they are not the enemy of your story. They are a mirror, a dark one, showing you something about what the person you chose is capable of, and perhaps more importantly, what they are not yet capable of. Someone who divides themselves between two people is someone who has not yet learned to be fully anywhere. Not with you, not with them, not even with themselves. Wait, I want to slow down here because this is where the real conversation lives. Because it's very easy when a third party situation shifts, when something changes in that dynamic, to focus entirely on what that means for them, for the person in the middle, for the other presence, to spend all your energy trying to read what their movement means, what it signals, whether it changes the equation. And while you're doing that, while you're using all of your attention to track the choreography of people who were not fully choosing you, what happens to you? What happens to the person doing the watching? That's the question that's been waiting underneath all the others. Let me talk about the echo. When you live inside a triangle, even partially, even on the outside of one, your own voice starts to echo strangely because you've been calibrating everything, your words, your timing, your needs, your expression is less than #0. 5# is greater than around a situation that was already off balance before you arrived. You learned to take up less space, to ask for less, to be grateful for the portion you were given, even when the portion was never really enough, even when something in you knew quietly, persistently, that you were built for something more full than this. And slowly, without noticing, your own wants started to sound like unreasonable demands to you. Your own needs started to feel like burdens. Your own worth, the real, solid, unearned worth that existed before any of this, started to feel conditional, dependent on their choice, contingent on being chosen over the other. That is the real damage of a triangle, not the betrayal, not the other person, but what it does to your sense of your own value when you spend too long waiting to be selected. And now something is shifting. The third party situation, whatever its shape, whatever its specifics, something in that dynamic is changing. Maybe you can feel it already. Maybe it's still just a vibration, a frequency that hasn't yet resolved into something nameable. And here is where I want to be very careful with you. Because when a triangle shifts, when the third presence moves, recedes, changes position, there is a rush of something, a sudden flood of possibility, that feeling of a door that had been blocked now being slightly ajar. And in that rush, it's very easy to make a decision from the oldest, hungriest part of yourself is less than #0. 5# is greater than the part that just wants the uncertainty to end, the part that will take any resolution over more waiting. Hold on. Before you move toward that door, before you let the shift in their situation become the thing that reorganizes your entire interior, ask yourself something. Has anything changed in them or only in their circumstances? Because circumstance changing is not the same as someone changing. A person who divided themselves when division was possible may simply divide themselves differently when the geometry of the triangle shifts. The pattern doesn't disappear because one of its points does. I'm not saying close the door. I'm saying walk toward it slowly, with both eyes open, with that part of you that knows the one that was right before, the one you dismissed before, the one whose signals you now wish you'd followed, fully awake and fully consulted. Because here is what the shadow work reveals in triangles. And this is the part that might bring tears, not of grief, but of recognition. The question was never really, will they choose me over the other person? The question was always, am I choosing myself? Let me talk about the cinder one more time, because I think some of you have been burning low for a while. Not extinguished, just banked, keeping a small, careful heat in the center while everything that once burned freely has been pulled in and conserved is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than because the situation didn't feel safe enough for the full fire. Because loving someone who is also loving elsewhere or who was requires a constant management of your own flame, a constant keeping of yourself just small enough not to overwhelm a space that was already crowded. You made yourself cinder to survive a situation that required it, but you were never meant to stay cinder. And if the situation is shifting, if the crowding is lifting, if the space is becoming something different, then the question is not only what do they do next? The question is, what do you do with all that fire you've been keeping? I'm not sure why, but this feels important to say right now. The person who waited, who stayed, who kept the door open even when everything reasonable said to close it, that person you did not wait because you were weak. You waited because something in you recognized something real, something genuine in the connection, underneath all the complications, underneath the divided attention and the unclear situation and the unnamed other presence, something that felt worth the difficulty. Maybe you were right about that. Maybe the thing you recognized was real. But here's what I want you to hold alongside that. Something being real doesn't automatically make it right for you. Something being genuine doesn't mean it's whole. And you, with everything you are, with everything you've been quietly carrying, is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than you deserve something whole, not a portion, not a divided thing, not someone who arrives at you by default because the other option shifted. Something whole, something chosen, something that doesn't require you to monitor the edges for shadows. The labyrinth of a triangle has a particular cruelty because it gives you just enough to stay, just enough warmth, just enough connection, just enough moments of genuine closeness that leaving feels like overreacting, like throwing away something real over something that maybe you misread, maybe you imagined, maybe isn't as significant as it felt. And so you stay, and the labyrinth adds another corridor, and you stay some more, and something in you, something essential, something luminous, dims slightly with each loop. The exit from this labyrinth is not through them. It was never through them. It's through the moment you decide quietly, without drama, without an audience, that the partial thing is no longer acceptable. Not because you hate them, not because the real things weren't real, but because you finally value your own wholeness more than you fear the discomfort of leaving the familiar broken thing behind. We're near the end, and I want to close with something that has nothing to do with them, with the third party, with what shifted and what it might mean and what they might do next. I want to close with you. There is a version of you that exists entirely outside of this triangle, outside of the waiting, outside of the monitoring, outside of the careful calibration of your own needs to fit inside a space that was never fully yours. a version of you that is not defined by who chose them or who they chose or where the third presence went. That version of you is not a future thing. It is not something you become after the situation resolves. It is available right now, in this breath, in the choice to let